What's good, my knowledge seekers? We're back at it, ready to dig up the darkest secrets of royalty and shake things up. Buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into the wild story of the Habsburg family, the curse of blood. Before we get into this juicy historical gossip that'll give you chills, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our tales. Drop a like if this trip to the past lights you up. Ring that bell to get notified for every new video, and let us know in the comments where you're joining us from on this adventure of wisdom. Your support is the spice that keeps us shining light on these forgotten voices. The House of Habsburg, a name that echoed for centuries as one of the most powerful and influential in Europe, ruled vast empires from the 15th to the 17th centuries. Their domains were a glorious mess, including the Holy Roman Empire, and thanks to strategic marriages, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, huge chunks of Italy and the Americas. For us knowledge hunters, the Habsburgs are pure gold, a story that hooks you, especially with that inbreeding issue that brought a ton of shocking physical and mental health problems, plus a legacy of endless intrigues and wars. Man, what a ride! Imagine the power they held. Yet their own blood became their worst enemy. The main theme here is how the Habsburgs' obsessive quest to keep their bloodline pure through inbreeding turned into their own curse, leading to grotesque physical and mental decline visible in the deformities and diseases that rotted them alive. The narrative hook lies in the brutal contrast between their immense global power and the extreme fragility of their bodies and minds, crumbling bit by bit from incurable ailments or sheer madness. We'll uncover the uncomfortable truths and suffering behind the oil paintings that showed them as glorious but sometimes unintentionally revealed traces of their tragedy. It's the story of how the most absolute power couldn't stop internal decay. Folks, will focus on key figures like Joanna the Ruiz of Castile, the Mad who lived a nightmare of melancholy and political manipulation. We'll also talk about Charles V of Germany and Spain, an emperor who ruled the world but was devoured by gout. Philip II of Spain, his son, also suffered that same physical agony. But the cherry on top, the most extreme case, is Charles II of Spain, the bewitched, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, a true testament to genetic disaster. And to wrap it up with a golden bow, Maria Theresa of Austria, a strong empress who still felt the physical weight of her lineage. The Habsburgs' main conflict was their own genetics and their deep obsession with dynastic legitimacy, which pushed them into inbreeding. A mess that led to a brutal generational decline. We'll see this decay with Joanna I of Castile, whose melancholy and jealousy led to manipulated confinement. Charles V, the emperor who held the world, suffered terribly from gout that deformed even his hands. Philip II carried that same curse with fevers and fluid buildup that swelled his body. Man, what an ordeal. But the most brutal case, the one that leaves you speechless, is Charles II of Spain, known as the Cursed or the Bewitched. This king was born with extreme deformities and severe physical and mental deficiencies, a stark example of what inbreeding can cause. His tongue was so large he could barely speak or eat properly, macroglossia, and his jaw jutted out so much he could hardly close his mouth, mandibular prognathism. It was the famous Habsburg jaw taken to the extreme. His life was a torment of illnesses and dependencies, unable to walk alone until age 8. This ghost of royalty, Charles II of Spain, lived an existence of unspeakable suffering. His premature death at just 38 was the final note of a life of physical and mental agony that ties your stomach in knots. His oil paintings, though they tried to hide his deformities, couldn't conceal his prominent jaw and frail expression, a visual testament to the genetic rot that consumed him. It's heavy to see how power can't buy health. And not to overlook the powerful women of the dynasty, we have Maria Theresa of Austria. Though a figure of strength and an enlightened ruler, she faced a heavy burden, bearing 16 children, including Marie Antoinette. The multiple pregnancies took a toll on her health, leaving her with heart issues, breathing difficulties, and edema. Her body swelled and sickened, a stark contrast to the vibrant young Archduchess in Martin van Maten's oil paintings, where she appears majestic with all the poise of an empress. But those images hide the health problems that slowly rotted her, the exhaustion of so many pregnancies and the weight of a vast empire. Damn, it's a reminder that even the strongest queens have human limits, and the pursuit of succession sometimes comes at a steep health cost. The Habsburg story gets even wilder with Joanna Moore of Castile. She was the daughter of those great monarchs Isabella II of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the Catholic kings who united Spain geographically and spiritually. Joanna married Philip I of Burgundy, known as the Handsome. But her life was a tragedy marked by relentless melancholy, consuming jealousy, and a diagnosis of madness that led to decades of confinement. In an oil painting of Joanna, we see a gaze that tries to capture her essence, but barely scratches the surface of the torment devouring her inside. Joanna's suffering was visceral, the kind that cuts deep. After her husband Philip died, her grief manifested in extreme ways. Imagine this: she refused to part with his body, dragging it around for months. That gut-wrenching pain and obsession plunged her into a bottomless pit. In an oil painting attempting to portray her, we see a queen, but it barely hints at the woman tormented by love and loss. Her over 40 years of confinement in Tordesillas is a brutal portrait of mental decline and abandonment, where her sanity was questioned. Man, what a mess manipulated for political gain. Joanna's madness was conveniently exploited first by her father and then by her son, Emperor Charles IX. This raises doubts about whether her condition was as severe as claimed or if it was a political ploy to strip her of power, a real chaotic mess. The intrigue around her is palpable, showing how in the Habsburg court, illness could be a tool to pull the strings of power. In a period oil painting, she's depicted as a sovereign, but historical accounts whisper a tale of neglect and manipulation that makes you think. Joanna's case foreshadows how physical or mental suffering became a pattern in the Habsburg line, a curse passed down through generations. And so we come to Charles V of Germany and Spain, Joanna's son and one of history's most powerful monarchs, a true giant. His empire was so vast it was said the sun never set on it. Despite all that power, his life was a constant struggle with wars and ultimately physical suffering that leaves you choked up. In Charles I's grand oil paintings, they often show the emperor's dignity, but few reveal the constant pain of his ailments. His imposing figure hid a reality of slow but relentless decay. Charles I suffered terribly from gout, an excruciatingly painful disease that tormented him from youth, and man got worse with age, deforming his hands and feet. He also had chronic digestive issues that never let up. In his final years, he was physically weak and exhausted by endless responsibilities and wars. Imagine ruling a massive empire while your body falls apart. In an oil painting of Charles in the Uniform, you see his majesty, but the shine of his armor couldn't hide the harsh reality of a body consumed by pain and decay. His abdication and retreat to a monastery was an act of deep disillusionment and soul-crushing exhaustion. Charles V, the emperor who conquered half the world, surrendered to the relentless advance of illness and fatigue. Oil paintings of him in old age reflect dignity, but also a resignation that makes you ponder. He was a man who, despite all his power, couldn't escape the decay stalking him, a true thunderbolt in a clear sky that struck the Habsburg dynasty and left a heavy mark on their blood legacy. After Charles V came his son Philip II of Spain, who built the imposing Escorial Palace Monastery. Known for his fervent Catholicism, his life was austere and somber, marked by family losses and health that deteriorated bit by bit. Oil paintings of Philip II show him as a brooding, calculating king with a gaze that seems to hide 1,000 secrets. But those images don't reveal the physical ordeal awaiting him, a painful decay echoing the Habsburg blood curse. Like his father, Philip II suffered from gout, but his final years were an agony that leaves you stunned, a mix of gout fever and dropsy fluid buildup. His body swelled grotesquely and was covered in pustules. Man, what a nightmare. A prolonged, painful decay that ended his life. Descriptions of his death are brutal, contrasting sharply with the image of an imposing king. In Philip II's oil paintings, you see a monarch's solemnity, but the reality was a man trapped in a body crumbling without mercy. Philip II's slow, suffering-filled death was a warning that inbreeding was taking its toll on the dynasty. Though he sought to maintain his empire's greatness, his own body became a symbol of decay. The Habsburgs' fate seemed heavy with illness, as a constant shadow, a scorpion, stinging generation after generation. Oil paintings of this king so sober and serious now whisper a tale of pain and resignation that official history sometimes overlooks. And so the world's greatest empire was forced to witness its monarch's decay. Now, folks, we reach the most tragic case, the one that leaves you with a lump in your throat, Charles II of Spain. Known as the Cursed or the Bewitched, he was the last Spanish Habsburg king. What a mess. He was born severely deformed, with a host of physical and mental issues that made you feel pity. This guy is the most brutal example of inbreeding's devastating effects on the Habsburgs. His oil paintings try to mask his deformities, but even they show his prominent jaw and frail expression, a true ghost of royalty. Charles II suffered from macroglossia, meaning his tongue was so large he could barely speak or eat properly, and his mandibular prognathism, the infamous Habsburg jaw at its extreme, prevented him from closing his mouth. He was frail, had seizures, and severe neurological issues. His development was drastically delayed, a mess that made him dependent on others. His life was a torment of illnesses and dependencies. Imagine he couldn't walk alone until age 8. Oil paintings of him try to give him a kingly air, but they can't hide the suffering he carried inside. Charles II's body was a mosaic of ailments, the result of generations of close-kin marriages. The blood purity the Habsburgs sought backfired like a boomerang, poisoning their own dynastic line. Doctors of the time didn't know what to do with him, attributing it to spells, hence his nickname, the Bewitched. When his life was a testament to how dynastic ambition can lead to genetic decay that leaves you speechless. In every oil painting of this unfortunate king, you sense a fragility that tugs at your heart. Charles II's inability to produce a healthy heir was a headache for the court, and his pitiful health sparked movie-like intrigues about who would succeed him. He was manipulated until his final days in a political mess that led to the War of the Spanish Succession. His premature death at just 38 was the endpoint of a life of physical and mental suffering that leaves you speechless. Charles II's case is the rawest, most brutal example of the Habsburgs' genetic decay, a true tragedy worthy of our knowledge quest. And to contrast with so much illness and deformity, we come to Maria Theresa I of Austria. Though she's a figure of strength called an enlightened ruler, she's also an example of how the dynasty's women bore the physical weight. As Queen of Hungary and Bohemia and Archduchess of Austria, she faced wars and the pressure of bearing 16 children, including the famous Marie Antoinette. Those multiple pregnancies took a brutal toll on her health, leaving her with weight issues, heart problems, breathing difficulties, and edema fluid buildup. Her body swelled and sickened in her final decades, a stark contrast to the vibrant young Archduchess she once was. In Martin van Maeten's oil painting, she appears majestic, with all the poise of an empress, but it hides the health issues that slowly rotted her, the exhaustion of so many pregnancies and the burden of a vast empire. Damn. It's a reminder that even the strongest queens have human limits, and the pursuit of succession sometimes comes at a high health cost. Maria Theresa. I represents the paradox of a dynasty that, while expanding its power globally, internally battled the fragility of its own blood. Her case is unique because, unlike other family members who succumbed to extreme deformities or madness, she was an undeniable leader with an iron will. Yet her story underscores that even a seemingly robust constitution couldn't fully escape the toll of relentless procreation, a dynastic necessity that exacted a brutal price on the female body. Her oil paintings immortalizing her in her prime don't tell of the sleepless nights, breathing struggles, or pain from her pregnancies and illnesses. She was the great Habsburg matriarch, trying to renew the dynasty with her many children to ensure continuity. But each birth was also a drain, a price her body paid. Descriptions of her final years with her swollen figure and chronic ailments contrast sharply with the youthful, dynamic portraits of her early days. It's a reminder that time, procreation, and illness are relentless teachers that don't distinguish between kings and commoners, though royals live it under the public eye. Yes, Maria Theresa's story, though less dramatic in terms of visible genetic decay than Charles II's, completes the Habsburg saga. It shows that the burden of the crown wasn't just about wars or political intrigues, but extended to the monarch's very bodies. Her life dedicated to the empire and family testifies to the Habsburgs' tireless fight to perpetuate their legacy even at the cost of their health. Her oil paintings are the facade of a queen who battled her own mortality. And so, folks, this journey through the Habsburgs' lives and decay leaves us with a deep reflection. The House of Habsburg offers a brutal look at the consequences of seeking blood purity through inbreeding. It was a quest that unintentionally brought a slew of incurable diseases and the crushing weight of power on already fragile individuals. What a ride! The intrigue in the Habsburg court was intense, a constant shadow haunting every member of the dynasty. Conspiracies, jealousy, and power struggles weren't just hallway gossip. They were calculated strategies that could define an empire's fate. The manipulation of figures like Joanna of Castile, whose madness was conveniently used to strip her of the throne, is a clear example of how mental illness became a political tool. The oil paintings of the Habsburgs we admire today don't show the secrets whispered in the palace's darkest corners or the betrayals simmering for a shot at power. Charles V, despite his immense power, couldn't escape this toxic atmosphere. His life of constant war and physical suffering made him vulnerable to intrigues. The gout that tormented him from youth weakened him, bit by bit, and his chronic digestive issues left him drained. In oil paintings, he's depicted with dignity, but behind that facade was a man consumed by pain and exhaustion, opening the door for others to seek their slice of power. Paranoia, a constant in royal courts, intensified with the monarch's fragility, creating a breeding ground for chaos. Philip II, Charles Devoured's son, was also caught in this web of intrigues, though his austere, calculating nature made him a master manipulator. He built the imposing Escorial Palace Monastery, a symbol of his Catholic fervor and desire for total control. Yet neither his piety nor cunning could stop the gout inherited from his father from slowly rotting him. His final years were an agony that leaves you stunned, with a swollen body covered in pustules. Oil paintings of Philip II show a brooding, calculating king, but they don't reveal the full extent of his final suffering or the intrigue swirling around him to secure the succession. Charles II's case, The Bewitched, is the emotional climax of this blood curse, folks. A story that takes your breath away. Born with extreme deformities and a host of physical and mental deficiencies, it's heart-wrenching. His macroglossia and mandibular prognathism, the Habsburg jaw at its worst, are the starkest testament to their inbreeding. His oil paintings try to soften his features, but even they show his prominent jaw and frail expression, a true ghost of royalty. Charles II's life was a torment of illnesses and dependency. Imagine he couldn't walk alone until age 8. He suffered seizures and neurological issues with severely delayed development that made him an eternal child. His inability to produce a healthy heir was a court headache, and his pitiful health sparked cinematic intrigues about succession. He was manipulated until his final days in a political mess that led to the War of the Spanish Succession, a story that makes you reflect on the cruelty of power. His suffering was so great that courtiers and even the public attributed it to spells and curses, hence his nickname, The Bewitched. The science of the time couldn't grasp the extent of his ailments, and his body rotted before everyone's eyes, a macabre spectacle that sealed the fate of the Spanish Habsburg line. In Charles II's oil paintings, they try to give him a kingly air, but they can't hide the torment he carried inside, a palpable visual testament to how the supposedly pure blood led to the dynasty's decay. Maria Theresa I of Austria, though a figure of strength and an enlightened ruler, also experienced an emotional climax of decline, albeit differently from her predecessors. She faced wars and the pressure of bearing 16 children, including Marie Antoinette. The multiple pregnancies took a brutal toll on her health, leaving her with weight issues, heart problems, breathing difficulties, and edema. Her body swelled and sickened in her final decades, a stark contrast to the vibrant young archduchess she once was. In Martin van Muyten's oil painting, she's majestic with all the poise of an empress, but it hides the health issues that slowly rotted her, the exhaustion of so many pregnancies and the burden of a vast empire. Damn. It's a reminder that even the strongest queens have human limits, and the pursuit of succession sometimes comes at a high health cost. Maria Theresa, I represents the paradox of a dynasty that, while expanding its power globally, internally battled the fragility of its own blood. The contrast between her unyielding political will and her body's vulnerability is the true climax of her story. Maria Theresa, the great matriarch, refused to show weakness, yet her suffering was palpable in court, where medical reports spoke of chronic fatigue, melancholy, and vapors. Her pregnancies were long and painful, and her body was clinically examined as imperial property. This constant physical and emotional demand led to gradual decay, though not as deforming as in other Habsburgs, a silent cost for securing her lineage's future. Each of her 16 pregnancies was a life-risking ordeal, a brutal demand on a body already burdened by the dynasty's inbreeding. Though more robust than the sum of her kin, the accumulated wear consumed her. The edema and heart issues in her final years were visible proof of this gradual rot. Maria Theresa Surn's oil paintings show her powerful and serene, but behind each brushstroke lies the story of a woman who paid a high physical price for her empire's stability and her family's perpetuation. The psychological toll of constant struggle and loss also contributed to her decline. Despite her iron determination, she lived under the pressure of wars and the need to hold the vast Habsburg inheritance together. This ongoing tension, combined with physical health issues, led to deep exhaustion and periodic melancholy. Her oil paintings in maturity present a strong, authoritative figure, but they can't convey the emotional burden and exhaustion eating at her from within. Maria Theresa. Surn's life reminds us that the Habsburg blood curse didn't always manifest in extreme deformities or madness, but also in the relentless wear of the body from procreation and the crown's pressure. Her ability to govern a vast empire and face multiple wars, while her body suffered the consequences of motherhood and age, is a feat. Yet this political triumph came with physical decay that transformed her, showing that even the strongest leaders are subject to biology and mortality. Despite her greatness as a stateswoman, Maria Theresa Surn's final years were overshadowed by physical decline. Her once dynamic body became heavy, swollen, and breathless, limiting her activities and confining her more and more. Court doctors, helpless against her heart issues, and edema could only ease her pain. It's a striking contrast, the empress who dominated Europe, but was a prisoner of her own flesh. In oil paintings of her old age, you see dignity, but the veil of illness is harder to hide. The intrigue didn't stop with Maria Theresa Surn's declining health. The question of succession and her children's influence, including Joseph II, created new power dynamics in court. Though she held the empire's reins until the end, her body's frailty made her more vulnerable to manipulations by those awaiting her departure. Maria Theresa Surn's story is a moving epilogue to the Habsburg saga, showing how the cycle of life decay and power continued even in the twilight of one of the dynasty's most formidable figures. Chronic pain and breathing difficulties became constant companions in her final decades. The empress, once a symbol of vitality and hope for the Habsburgs, became an example of the silent decay that time and illness impose. Her nights were sleepless, her days a battle against discomfort, a torment intensified despite her opulent surroundings. In her final oil paintings, though, her gaze remains piercing. You sense a fatigue beyond age, a reflection of the physical cost of her extraordinary life. The Habsburg blood curse, folks, is a story that makes you think, an obsessive quest for dynastic purity that unintentionally became their ruin. Inbreeding, the habit of marrying close relatives to keep the blood pure and power concentrated, came at a steep cost. The diseases and physical and mental deformities across generations are the starkest proof of how this dynasty's immense power rotted from within. This legacy of pain, intrigue, and decay contrasts brutally with the oil paintings meant to project glory and perpetuity, but today they whisper a much rawer, more human truth. The Habsburg story is a harsh lesson about the fleeting nature of power and the vulnerability of the human body even under a crown. Every illness, premature death, and act of violence that marked this family forged a legacy of decay that would resonate for centuries. Despite efforts to glorify their memory, the truth is many lived and died in agony, their bodies and minds succumbing to forces beyond their control. The oil paintings of the era, while showing their majestic poise, are a veil barely hiding the scars of a personal and dynastic ordeal that we, through our quest for knowledge, seek to unveil in all its raw reality. The Habsburg reign was a time of light and shadow, where the court's pomp and splendor couldn't hide human fragility and fate's cruelty. Its members, trapped in a web of political intrigues and religious conflicts, were dragged into an abyss of physical and moral suffering. The persistent curse that seemed to haunt them manifested in various forms, from political incest to keep royal blood pure to the mysterious diseases that decimated their heirs in violent deaths that abruptly ended reigns and lives. The oil paintings adorning museums and history books today offer a window into a carefully crafted reality where apparent perfection hides the desperation and slow decay eating at the dynasty. The end of the main Spanish Habsburg line with Charles II gave way to a new dynasty, the Bourbons. Yet the shadow of the Habsburg era lingered, a reminder of a time when monarchy was tested in the most extreme ways. The story of this family, with its sick and deformed kings, powerful but tormented queen mothers and empresses who paid a high physical price for succession, testifies to how the pursuit of power can lead to self-destruction. In every surviving oil painting from those times, we see the attempt to glorify an image that reality dismantled, revealing the horrors and imperfections hidden beneath layers of splendor. To grasp the magnitude of the Habsburg drama, just recall the bizarre deaths and diseases that consumed its members. The gout that deformed Charles V and Philip II, the macroglossia and prognathism of Charles II and Maria Theresa's edema are just examples of the physical decay that accompanied their power's decline. Every royal funeral, pompous and solemn, was also a silent cry of a lineage's fragility that couldn't perpetuate itself. The stories of their decaying bodies, often grotesquely contrasting with the youth of their rise, are the heart of our narrative, revealing that even kings couldn't escape the vulnerability of flesh and time's inevitable mark. Yes, the Habsburg blood curse closes not as a fantastical legend, but as a harsh historical reality forged by ambition, intrigue, illness, and violence. The names of Joanna of Castile, Charles V of Germany and Spain, Philip II of Spain, Charles II of Spain, and Maria Theresa of Austria are etched in history not just for their reigns, but for the personal dramas that defined and consumed them. In every oil painting of these monarchs, beyond artistic perfection, we glimpse a dynasty that, in its desperation to cling to power, rotted from within, leaving a legacy that fascinates and terrifies in equal measure. The lesson the Habsburgs leave us is clear: immense territorial power, and the obsession with blood purity couldn't protect them from biological decay. This dynasty, spanning continents and centuries, became a living laboratory of inbreeding's consequences, proving that nature has its own rules, and even the noblest lineage can crumble from its foundations. Through their sick bodies and tormented minds, history screams that true strength lies not just in crowns, but in facing the inherent fragility of the human condition. The Habsburg tale invites reflection on the cost of unbridled ambition. Was the suffering of Joanna of Castile or the agony of Charles II of Spain worth it to maintain a pure lineage and vast empire? This royal family's decline isn't just historical gossip. It's a parable about power's limits and the inevitability of human vulnerability. The oil paintings, silent witnesses to their glory, also veil their torment, a reminder that history is full of truths that beauty cannot hide.